Do you ever wonder what your therapist is thinking about after your sessions? Late at night when they're contemplating life and all of its mysteries? This is an opportunity for us to peel back the curtain on that a little bit. We're sitting down with my wife, your therapist, to learn a little bit more about what's on her mind. My name is Price, and I married your therapist.
Hi, it's your therapist, Ash. Please keep in mind that even though this is a podcast about mental health and therapy, it's not the same thing as therapy, and it's not a replacement for it.
Well, thank you so much. Before we dive into it, we have a few things I want to cover, a few quick announcements.
Yep.
Last week, very exciting, you were a guest on a podcast titled
Confidentially Insecure.
Confidentially Insecure by Sam Taylor.
Yeah.
How did that go?
Oh, it was so good. It was so much fun to be on the podcast. I'm a big fan of the podcast. And we had a great conversation about pressure to reach certain milestones by certain ages in your life, and social media and neurodivergency. And specifically, Sam really focuses on usually like university age students, which is a population of people that I love.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was good.
No, we're definitely a big fan of his podcast. That's Confidentially Insecure.
Yep.
If you like what we're doing, we highly recommend that you check him out.
Yeah.
And we really appreciate the opportunity for you to get to go be on there with him.
Yeah, absolutely. It was very cool. And he's bringing a lot of vulnerability to this space, which I think is really important.
Yeah, totally. The other thing that I wanted to bring up is that last week we were mentioning that we were receiving a lot of backlash on the internet for supporting trans individuals, and we got some negative reviews for our podcast as a direct result of that.
Yeah.
And we asked the listeners to go on and give us some positive reviews if they felt like we earned it. Mm-hmm. And you guys turned up for us. You guys showed up.
It was so cool. Yeah.
No, it was fantastic. We received a bunch of reviews on the various platforms where our podcast is listed. Mm-hmm. And I just can't thank you guys enough for showing us that support. We now have a 4.5-star average rating.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Yeah. It's really important to get that sort of feedback, especially early on when you're podcasting. Mm-hmm. So it was really just much appreciated for everybody to come out and show their support like that. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so today's episode, we're going to be talking about bipolar disorder.
Yep.
I'm very excited about this episode because I know somebody with bipolar disorder.
I know somebody with bipolar disorder.
It's me. I'm bipolar.
Yeah.
I want to talk about our experiences dealing with it. I want to learn a little bit more about how you've grown in your knowledge of bipolar disorder as a part of your expertise in the area of neurodivergence as a whole,
yep,
and how that knowledge has benefited you to be a more effective counselor or therapist in the therapeutic space.
Yeah.
But before we get into those details, why don't you tell me at the highest level what bipolar disorder is and what it means to have bipolar disorder?
Sure. Well, I'm really glad that you're so excited to talk about bipolar disorder because it's honestly a topic that makes me a little bit nervous to talk about.
Oh, really?
There's so much stigma around it. I think it is so commonly represented in movies as somebody who is, quote unquote, crazy. And that a lot of people dealing with this diagnosis do feel like they're going crazy, do feel like aspects of their life are out of control. And I had a lot of clients, definitely some clients who had received a diagnosis and felt good about it, felt like it was helpful to them and explained a lot in their life, which is kind of what we hope for around diagnosis.
Right.
But an awful lot of folks who felt really ashamed of it because the experiences, the encounters that they had with it, one, were difficult in their own life, and then also it was so stigmatized outside of that. And I want to do service to this by, on one hand, talking about how severe it can be and how much it can be to deal with, and that if you are dealing with those things, it's not your fault. And there's a reason behind that. And also to not be contributing more stigma to it as we're talking about it. So Yeah, that's how I feel walking into this topic.
I think that if you have bipolar disorder and it's not diagnosed, it can be incredibly frustrating to live with, because, and we'll get into this.
Yep.
But on one hand, you're extremely depressed and unable to do anything like that feels productive or good or of value. And then on the other hand, you're extremely manic and you can't stop. You're an efficiency machine. You're out there living your life and getting shit done at a high level. And then you're left wondering, why is it that I spend months unable to move? And then I spend months where I can't stop moving. And it does make you feel crazy, like you're saying.
Exactly. People with depression already deal with so much shame around, like, why can't I do these things?
Yeah.
But I think when you're swinging between these two kind of extreme ends of that spectrum, people can feel especially frustrated with themselves because sometimes they have this unstoppable energy.
Right.
And sometimes they have no energy at all. And that's a really tough place to be.
Yes.
And to figure out what is the middle, like, who am I apart from these things? And when you were getting your diagnosis, I feel like that was a thing we were talking about early on. What part is you and what part is this extreme, these extreme mood shifts?
Because on one end, you're very depressed. On the other end, you're very manic. So is it right in the middle? That's who I am.
Right.
That's my identity. Because I don't want to be depressed.
Yeah.
And because I'm manic, I'm not just depressed, and vice versa. So where is that true identity of like who Price is?
Yep. What am I like on a day-to-day basis?
Who am I exactly? That's a big question.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a step back because as you can tell, I'm very excited to get into this.
I'm glad.
What is going on? When if the listener, let's assume the listener has never heard the term bipolar disorder before. Yep. What are we talking about exactly?
Yep. So bi is referring to two. So it's talking about these two different polarized extremes. It's talking about low lows, major depressive disorder, and high highs, mania or hypomania. So bipolar disorder breaks down into two different distinct categories, bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. And both of them are dealing with some form of mania. And bipolar 2 is always dealing with depression, but either way, they're kind of swinging back and forth between these two extremes.
Okay, so what is mania exactly?
So mania is it's an abundance of energy. It can be like agitated energy. It can be a decreased need for sleep. You might go days and days without getting any sleep at all, and it doesn't seem to impact you. You seem to have that same amount of energy. It can be engaging kind of compulsively in pretty harmful and damaging behaviors, can be spending a lot of money.
I like to think of every movie where you've got the scientist who's almost cracked it and they're in their basement and they're surrounded by papers and they haven't eaten and they haven't slept and they are just like in it to win it. Yeah. That always feels to me like a manic episode on some level, right?
It almost does appear to be this like superhuman ability to just go and go and go without needing the things that we tend to need, like sleep and rest. Right. But yeah, it can be a really agitated and irritable mood, and it can involve hyperfixation on something. So the difference between bipolar 1 and bipolar 2 is that bipolar is...
Because it comes in flavors.
Right. Bipolar 1 is dealing with mania, which is, by definition, an impediment to your life. You're not able to go about some sort of activities of daily living. It's impeding your ability to either socialize in the way you need to go to work, to go to school, to do something, because these symptoms are so extreme that you're experiencing and it's interfering. Hypomania is the same sorts of symptoms, a decreased need for sleep, sometimes engaging in behaviors that are harmful and that are damaging to your life, but it's not to the point where it's interfering with your life. When you're dealing with hypomania, because you have bipolar 2, you tend to, again, kind of have that superhuman ability to, you will work all day and be incredibly productive at work. And then after work, you're starting a new business and you're chopping a year's worth of firewood and you're doing this thing. And then you're going to bed and you're not able to sleep. And then you're getting up the next day and you're doing the same thing all over again. But you are still going to work. You are still able to engage in kind of activities of daily life.
And I think that you've mentioned before that mania, as opposed to hypomania, can also be marked by periods of psychosis.
Yep. So if it's ever involved psychosis, that automatically puts it into the mania bipolar 1 category. And
so psychosis is...
It's any sort of break from reality. Sometimes it's something called delusions of grandeur, which is like maybe somebody thinking that they're a deity or that they're, all powerful in some way. It can be extreme paranoia, thinking that people are after you, thinking that you're involved in some sort of... secret government mission. Like it's something that it's not grounded in reality. That's a psychotic break. And that's an area where I worry about increasing stigma. But yeah, if you do have something that is that break with reality, that's going to go into the...
What do you mean you're worried about increasing stigma?
I feel like that's what we love to include in movies, is that this person thinks that they're Jesus. And that's what's really interesting to look at and talk about. But it can be an aspect of that. And again, it's your brain being so agitated and so hyper-focused and not really, when those thoughts are racing and everything, it's leading to these extreme thoughts of somebody's after me or there's secretly this amazing thing about me. And those, delusions of grandeur can be a part of that.
I met somebody who was working out at the gym that I go to, and he was just there that day. Haven't seen him since, but he was definitely having a manic episode.
Yeah.
You could tell, you could look in his eyes and see kind of a crazed, wild sort of look, and he was talking rapidly. Like he was on speed.
Oh, that really fast speech is a hallmark trait.
And it was like he didn't need to breathe. He was talking so quickly. And he was talking about how he was the world's best kickboxer. And he was in the gym to keep getting stronger because he was going to be the next kickboxer.
Yep.
He wanted me to have his name and his phone number so that we could stay friends.
Yeah.
I didn't know this person, but he wanted to be friends with me, and he wanted me to be a part of his meteoric rise to the top.
Yep.
And all of a sudden, him and I were very close in his mind. And
and
I have just literally seconds before this conversation just met this person. And I was very uncomfortable with the way that he was behaving, mainly because I recognized it.
I was going to
say, what
say,
it was.
You immediately knew kind of what was going on with this guy.
Yeah.
You started to see those signs.
So I started speaking to him calmly about mania and that he might be experiencing that. And I quickly learned that first, I am not a therapist. But second, somebody who's having a manic episode is not somebody who you can talk to about what mania is.
Right.
Because then it switched. He got his brow like furrowed and he looked at me and he was like, "Oh, you're not with me."
Yep.
And I forget what he said, but it was something like, "I have now identified you as someone who is out to get me."
Yeah.
And then he left. He didn't want to even be in the building with me.
Yep. Well, I think that so many people have had experiences with some sort of, issue with their mental health that leads to those sort of extreme thoughts. Like, all of my friends are angry with me. I'm like particularly lazy, or I'm the only person who's not really keeping up with things. And so if you take that same sort of really catastrophic, it's the worst case scenario thinking, and apply it to this really high energy, this really
You give it rocket fuel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then you start to end up with those sorts of manic thoughts. Exactly like, I'm the best boxer in the world. This really extreme belief about himself. And that is a break with reality.
And I've been to enough boxing classes to know that I'm not a boxer. And I could have laid this kid out. There was nothing about him that suggested, that backed up the claims he was making in any capacity.
Yeah.
And it was just, and then I found out later he's been in and out of jail, because he has these episodes and he gets violent, and he has a record now, and now he's a kid who's got a record, and that's his life now. And I wonder how many people are in and out of prison or jail because they were never able to be diagnosed appropriately with the very real things that are going on.
Absolutely. And on the other side of that, on the depressive side of that, people with bipolar disorder are so much more at risk for dealing with suicidal ideation or suicide attempts. In fact, they're 15 times more likely than the general population. Wow. And there's an estimate that a quarter of deaths by suicide involve somebody who's bipolar. So there's also this other extreme of this really scary, sad, hard thing that's a part of that. And a lot of times this back and forth can be a little bit interrelated. I think that we've seen in your own life where you'll experience this period of hypomania and then you get to the end of it and you almost crash into a depression.
Yeah. Because you've gone so long without getting the rest that you need. You've gone so long at operating at such a frenzied sort of level of energy that you do crash and you plummet. You are riding a motorcycle at 150 miles an hour off a cliff.
Yeah. And those thoughts, I think, are so much harder to deal with at this point because you do have this other extreme that you were just experiencing. So you might be having realizations around the things that you did that weren't good for you and weren't healthy for your life. And also having had so much energy to feel like you were accomplishing stuff. A lot of people dealing with mania or hypomania feel very creative during that time. Yep. And that can be really hard to lose and suddenly feel totally uninspired and depressed. And I think that as hard as depression is, that extreme swing can be even harder.
When you go from an inflated sense of ungrounded worth to a very realistic sense of complete worthlessness.
Well, that's still not fair.
It's realistic in that I'm not able to get out of bed. It's realistic in your own mind.
Sure, yeah.
Then that sort of fluctuation gives you whiplash.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it.
I can relate to that because I am sitting here depressed, unable to function, wondering what is wrong with me. Just a few weeks ago, I was at the top of my game. Mm-hmm. Why am I struggling so much today?
Yep.
And it's not a gradual slide into that place. You are dropped into it.
Yeah.
And it makes sense to me that suicide rates are high amongst people who experience that.
Yeah.
Because it makes you feel like, I don't even remember what it's like to be able to gather that sort of energy within myself in the first place. This is my life now.
Yeah.
And you go, from experience, you go through that cycle every time. Mm-hmm. Where you are feeling depressed and you remember achieving what felt like great things, and then you do not even remember how to get there.
Yeah, you don't connect with that person at all.
So there's utterly no hope in that moment.
Yeah.
What you don't know is give it a few months and you'll kick out of that.
Yeah.
But that is not the way that your brain is communicating with you.
Yes, absolutely. And that's another important point. You're describing these extended periods of time. I hear a lot of people accuse other people of being bipolar.
Oh my God.
My mom is so back and forth on things. She's bipolar. My boyfriend is, whatever. And it's not a mood swing within a given day. It's not somebody whose moods are really up and down.
Yeah, you can't wake up depressed and go to sleep manic.
Yeah, it's these much more extended periods of time. In fact, rapid cycling is a type of bipolar, or it's a kind of an add-on diagnosis to that, which means that it happens more than 4 times in a year. So typically for bipolar disorder, you're not even having cycles more than a couple times a year, a handful of times.
Yeah, we're not talking days, we're talking weeks of one state or the other.
Yeah.
And then the transitionary phase is pretty short in between those two, but you definitely hang out in one or the other for quite some time.
Yep. Yeah, it's extended. Now, there can also be people who deal with mixed expressions. So they might have both happening at the same time. They might have the really racing, energized thoughts, and they might also have depressive thoughts. But typically, just kind of standard is that it takes time. It's not something that's switching back and forth day to day. It's something that's a little bit stable over time and then back and forth one to the other.
So I have a little hypomania story to share with the class. I'm looking at we're sitting in our living or our kitchenette. I'm looking at the ceilings. When we moved into the house, what do the ceilings have?
Popcorn,
like 1990s, early 2000s, popcorn textured ceilings.
It was awful.
Yeah, and you didn't like it.
Yep.
On a scale of 1 to 10, what would you rate popcorn ceilings?
I feel like I only mentioned it like once that I didn't like it.
But I was manic.
Right.
Hypomanic.
So like I didn't like it 4 out of 10.
So we decided to scrape the ceilings.
Yep.
To get them to be a more flat texture.
Yeah.
Make it look a little more updated.
And this is a huge process. You've got to like wet everything down completely so that you get the texture up there wet enough so that you can scrape it off. Then there's the act of scraping it off. And then you've got to paint over it multiple times. It's a huge undertaking and people take a long time to do it and often hire professional help. What happened?
I got it done in like an afternoon.
Yeah, you got everything, but I think one room done in an afternoon.
Yeah. I didn't stop once I started. I was totally focused and honed in on it. I'm not even medicated at this point.
No.
We're not even really understanding what's going on with me.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I worked over 10 hours without stopping.
And what you mean by not stopping, like you did not stop to eat. You did not stop to take a bathroom break. You just did the whole thing in one go.
Mm-hmm. 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 And that's hypomania.
Yeah.
When people are wondering what hypomania is and how it impacts the people that are doing it or that are in it, that's the sort of thing we're talking about, is that you can hone in on a specific task and without any like regard for your own physical well-being, you can accomplish that task. Mm-hmm. The problem is, because people are like, wow, that's amazing that you got that done so quickly. The problem is that you definitely crash. The body has the receipts and cashes those in. Like,
that's not happening at the time you're able to keep up with this, but it definitely comes.
Yeah. And so I remember, for starters, my irritability was through the roof throughout all of that. I was extremely rude to you during that process. When you were just kind of like worried, like, hey, babe, do you want to go like use the bathroom? I'm like, no, get out of here. And then
you were so irritable during that period of time. And that is the thing, even not just with a manic episode, but with the hypomania, it can be this defensive feeling around what you're doing. So it can be this really good, I can accomplish everything. And when somebody counters that, maybe, is this a good idea? Maybe you should rest.
Yeah.
There's like this defensiveness around it that's very hard to break. I think a lot of our disagreements during that time have come up around that sort of stuff.
Yeah. And I get all of this work done. And I remember that mania lasting, or hypomanic episode lasting beyond just the popcorn ceiling. We were doing a lot of renovation work in the house.
Yep, a lot of painting and everything.
A lot of painting, a lot of alcohol for me to kind of help fuel that.
Yeah.
And then on the other side, a complete crash and burn. Sleeping for days, unable to function. That was when it was at its apex, because it was affecting my ability to like go to my job.
Yes, and that's often true of bipolar too, is that it's not that it's a less severe diagnosis. You don't have mania, you have the lesser version of that, which doesn't tend to interfere with your ability to go to a job, but you do have depression, and that does tend to interfere with somebody's ability to go live their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if, this week you're laying in bed and you are physically unable to get out of bed or mentally unable, I guess, to get out of bed. And then you are recalling last week that you checked off a lot of stuff off your to-do list.
Yeah.
like I said, there's a lot of whiplash there with your ability to perform, you know.
Yep.
And so a lot of, like you said earlier, a lot of people say that bipolar is that Katy Perry song, you're hot, then you're cold,
Right.
you're yes, then you're no. That's not it at all. Katy
No.
Perry is describing something else entirely when she's singing about that. I think she's talking about borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, she's talking about something different. Yeah.
Stay tuned, upcoming episode. We'll talk about that, and I will sing that song again. What we're talking about is something that takes weeks to cycle through.
Yep.
What are some other misconceptions about bipolar disorder?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are misconceptions around that constant, like, day to day or within the day sort of cycling. Something else that people might not know often accompanies it is a lot of, like, self-medication. So oftentimes people dealing with bipolar disorder are also drinking or smoking or doing something to try to offset these extremes and to deal with that feeling of instability. What are some other misconceptions around it? It's often missed by counselors. It's often missed by trained therapists. And it's misdiagnosed as depression, because what's happening is that people with bipolar disorder are only coming into sessions when they're feeling low and depressed.
Right.
And when they are feeling manic or hypomanic, they're on top of the world. They don't need therapy.
I'm busy scraping popcorn.
Right, you got stuff to do.
Right.
And so they're often getting that depression diagnosis, and they're missing the whole arc of what's happening. And the issue with that, well, one extreme issue with that is that depression medication can set off manic episodes. That if you're on the wrong depression medication, because it's meant to be doing things in your brain to help pull you out of depression, it might slingshot you right back into mania or hypomania.
So the moments when I'm at my lowest is when I'm more naturally going to seek help. So I'm going to a therapist to talk about how depressed I feel.
Yeah. And again, that feeling, I've always been depressed. I feel like I'm always this way. Everything is hopeless, because depression gets us into that cycle where we can't see outside of what's happening.
And then I'm prescribed medication to offset the depression that will spike levels of chemicals in my brain that will trigger the mania.
Yeah.
And now I'm worse off than before.
Right. Now you're dealing with another manic episode. So maybe things in your life are again being, you might be engaging in more harmful activities that are making some things in your life feel worse off. You're digging yourself into worse debt, or you're hurting relationships that you have or whatever. And you're not going to therapy because, on the other hand, you feel unstoppable. And
why do you need therapy if you feel unstoppable?
Yeah. Another thing that's happening is that it's really common for people who are having a manic episode to stop taking their medication because they feel so good. I don't need that anymore. I feel great. And so then they're in this vicious cycle of only seeking help when they're depressed. Their therapist is missing everything else. And so if any of these things are ringing true for you, even if you don't feel like you can seek out help when you're having these extreme highs, it's really important to kind of document and to tell your therapist about what's happening so that they're able to get a clearer picture and not give you something that's going to continue the cycle in your life.
Listen. Come here. You know who I'm talking to. You know who you are. If you are on medication and you're feeling better, the answer is not to stop taking the medication because you're better. That means the meds are working. Yep. Keep taking them. You know who you are.
Take your meds.
Take your meds. Take them.
It's so true. And it's, it's a natural part of us. Like so many people don't want to be on medication.
True.
There's so much stigma around medication. It can be just difficult to remember to keep up with. It can be expensive. And people, it's really common to feel better and to stop taking them, but that means that the meds are working. And the other thing is that a lot of times people who also deal with mania or hypomania don't want to lose some of those feelings, and they feel like their medication makes them feel numbed out. If your medication is making you feel numbed out, you're on the wrong one. that's a sign that that's not the correct medication for you. Don't stop taking it. Go make an appointment with your psychiatrist right away and tell them that it's not making you feel like your full self. Well, that's really important.
I think that we're bringing up medication because it is such an important part of balancing this chemical imbalance in your brain. You're shifting from one to the other, and there's a lot of speculation as to why that happens. I don't think that the scientific community has really pinpointed exactly what's going on.
We are still so new to figuring out how brains work, so there's a lot of theories, but yeah.
I think it's safe to say, though, that your brain is overproducing chemicals that create a manic state, and then overproduce chemicals or underproduce chemicals that create a depressed state, which is why some of the most effective medications for people who are diagnosed with bipolar disorder are mood stabilizers.
Yep, it helps to just level that out and keep it balanced instead of having those big swings back and forth.
And the thing is, what I found, these are not medications that solve the problem.
Yeah.
There is no silver bullet here. They help mitigate the problem.
A good psychiatric medication, a good medication for depression, anxiety, for mood disorder, whatever. It's not solving the issue. It's not the only thing that you need, but it is allowing you the space to actually be able to take control of your own life. It's just like giving you enough breathing room so that then the coping skills are working, so that then the tools that you're learning in therapy are actually able to be implemented. It's not that you never experience lows and highs anymore. It's that you know what's happening when it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gives you an awareness of what's going on. I've always felt that expecting medication, especially when you're bipolar, to solve all of the issues is a lot like putting on armor and going into battle and expecting to win the battle simply because you have armor on.
Yep, you're protected.
You're protected.
You
You
have
still
this
got
layer
to
of
fight,
defense.
though.
Yeah.
You still got to show up and swing your sword around and fight these demons off. But you now have a chance of success because you are protected.
Yeah.
Or at least that's been my experience.
And that's what good medication does, is that when you've got the right combination of things at work, and usually with something like bipolar disorder, it does tend to be a combination of things that get you to the right place, that right balance. That it's just giving you the space to allow you to do that it's not solving the issue for you. There isn't medication that does that, but that you're just then empowered to use the other things that you're learning to do.
So I think that getting on the right medication is an important step to help find some equilibrium between these two states, right? But I still experience a state of depression and I still experience a state of hypomania.
Yeah.
What has been the most important aspect to dealing with those in terms of my own mind, coupled with this effective medication, has been the therapy that I have been getting.
Yeah.
And I think that you offer therapy to people who are dealing with these same sorts of things, who are also on medication, right? But let's talk about why talk therapy is crucial to finding balance.
Yeah.
And finding that awareness between those two states of being.
Yes. Yeah, it is such an important aspect of this. So a couple of different things can be happening with talk therapy that make it really effective. One is that we can do practical planning around making sure that you're getting your medication and making sure that you're taking care of some of these activities of daily living that just need to be accomplished. So that can look like at all times figuring out a plan for taking your medication. I had a client who really struggled with this. And I mean, so many clients who've really struggled with remembering to take their medication. But I'm thinking of a particular instance where we just needed to figure out a cue that would remind this person to be able to take the medication when it was needed.
This is so important to medication, is that you got to take it. In order for it to work, you got to take it consistently in order for it to work.
At the same time of day, that's important.
And if you're bipolar, the crux of the issue in your life is that you are experiencing a lot of inconsistency.
Yep. So like what we've done for you is that we have your medication in a place where you cannot miss it. It's where you go every day at the start of your day, and it's as accessible to you as possible. And that's what I help a lot of clients do, is where's the first place you go to in the morning? Maybe you, when you're depressed, you struggle with brushing your teeth, but you always go to the bathroom. Okay, can we keep it en route to the bathroom? If you always go to the fridge first thing, if you always go wherever, like where can we be storing this so that you basically have to trip over it to go about the rest of your day?
Yeah.
So some of that can be managing that sort of thing. When it comes to, it can be dealing with the depression side of things. So figuring out how to kind of keep up again with these activities of daily living and combat a lot of the thoughts that come along with depression, that this lasts forever, that life has always been bad, that it's always going to be bad.
Right.
And then putting in place some checks and balances so that when you're dealing with mania or hypomania, you have some resources in your life that are keeping things from feeling like they're spinning out of control. Where can we utilize the fact that you really do have a decreased need for sleep? When you're really in the throes of that, like, it's not worth your time to lay there and lie awake and let your mind race. What can we be doing that's going to be helpful, that's also not going to feel like it's crashed your life at the end of this?
Right. So how do you recommend that somebody, let's talk about what are some cognizant actions that we can take to kind of counteract this state of depression that we might find ourselves in? What are some things that you're encouraging clients to do to kind of think through that well?
Yep.
And to stay alive
Yeah.
during those periods?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one of those things when depression is at its worst, we're talking about suicidal ideation, and a therapist is somebody who's really able to assess exactly what level of assistance you need to get through that period of time.
Okay, what's suicidal ideation?
That's when you're having thoughts about suicide or death or dying.
Okay.
So that can range anywhere from just like the feeling of wanting to go to sleep and not wake up again. Doesn't have to be that like I want to die. It can just be, gosh, I don't want to keep doing this anymore.
Just to me, that's like acknowledging existence is hard. Mm-hmm. Like existing right now is hard. I'm not enjoying existing.
Yeah.
I would love to fall asleep and not have to wake up.
Or like skip this period, you know?
Yeah.
I just don't want to keep doing this. And so that's kind of one level, and we deal with that in a different way than somebody who's coming in and maybe has an active plan to die. And that's going to require a different level of
like
help.
They've thought through the steps they are going to take to commit suicide.
To die by suicide.
To die by suicide. Mm-hmm.
A lot of the language that we use around even suicide is really stigmatizing. Like, what else do you commit? You commit like crimes, or you commit a sin.
Right.
And so some of the work that the mental health community is doing around that is to recognize that those can be a normal part of depression. That again, depression gets you into this really small, closed down circle of believing that everything is always going to be this way. And on one hand, depression, like everything that our bodies do, our brains do, is very adaptive for us. Depression is meant to make your world very, very small. It's too much to focus on all of these other aspects of living. Let's just pare life down to the very basics. It's almost like having a really bad cold, the things that we do to attend to depression. Like, you do need extra sleep. You do need extra rest. You need to eat food that's comforting and nourishing to your body. Mm-hmm. You need to have connection that's meaningful to you. Like, you need to have just the pared down things that really are the most vital parts of life. And depression is meant to make us focus on those things. Now, it's horrible to experience.
Right.
But as a therapist, as somebody going to therapy with depression, we're going to figure out what those things are that are needed. Be really gentle with ourselves, because you're not going to get those things every day. Even that's too much to ask for, and that's okay. That this is something that's happening to you and something that you don't have to feel ashamed about dealing with. And yeah, that we're slowly building those things. And one of the tough things about depression is that you can't do the things that you need to do to feel better. So what are the little steps we can take toward feeling better?
I remember my therapist and I coming up with a list of, okay, you need to shower every day.
Yep.
You need to shower like a nice hot shower that you really just are able to relax in.
Yeah.
You need to you need to brush your teeth. You need to put on some deodorant.
Yep.
You need to brush your hair. You need to, I think we said, make my bed at one point. That if I was able to make my bed, that would help me feel like I was starting my day off the right way.
Yeah.
And just really simple things where I'm there as an adult with an adult job.
Right.
And it's very humiliating to be having that conversation. But the reality is that that's where I was at. I've been there many times.
Yeah.
And now when I go to when I'm feeling depressed, like you said, we bring it way back.
Yeah. What are just the basic vital things that that are necessities of life? That like, what are the basic things that you need to do?
And I think a part of the lies that our brains tell us when we're feeling depressed are, look at all the things you're not doing. You're not making it to the gym. You're not crushing it at work. You're not, out there taking care of things for your extended family. There are so many things that you could do on better days that you're not doing now. Don't you feel bad about that?
Right.
Doesn't that make you feel bad?
Right.
Now you've got to change your expectations of yourself. Okay, today I'm not going to get there.
Yep.
I'm not going to make it to the gym. It's not going to happen. There's no amount, and there's no value in me going today because it's not going to happen. So why would I make myself feel like crap over something that is not going to happen?
And the same sort of thing, like if you were dealing with the flu, you wouldn't make yourself go to the gym because you ought to go to the gym or you have a goal of going to the gym every day. It's not going to be good for you to go. You need to sit in bed, or you need to just get up and get yourself some nutritious food and, have one good conversation with a loved one, like little baby steps.
And if anybody's listening right now, it's like, I would go to the gym. Like when I'm feeling low, I go to the gym, whatever. Like that sounds awesome. That must be so awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I would really struggle with that sort of mantra or that mindset that I had to go do those things. And when I've had that mindset, it has been extremely unhealthy for me to have. And what's better is to navigate those weeks with a little kindness for myself so that I come out on the other side alive.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. That's
because those are the stakes.
Yeah.
For people who like me who are dealing with that.
Yeah.
Because I'm trying to survive this.
Well, that's a distinguishing feature of major depressive disorder, is that it is disruptive to your life in some way. You can't do the things you normally do. So while we all deal with lows, we all deal with days where we just don't feel like our best self, or we maybe have thoughts that like things aren't so great. That's not the same thing as depression.
Yeah.
And also depression looks different on everybody. Yeah. So there's no reason to compare ourselves to somebody else who's going through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So what do you call those lists that I make of the things that I'm just trying to do, those bare minimum sorts of things I'm trying to accomplish?
Yeah, those are ADLs. That's activities of daily living.
Just that this is what we're going to do. By virtue of waking up today, we're going to accomplish these small things.
Yep. And that's going to look different for everybody. So for you, the showering was really important. It's something that on the other side of that actually did help to make you feel better, did help to make you feel like something happened. Maybe showering's not a good one for somebody. Maybe that's something that they get out of the shower feeling much more tired and like the depression's heavier. So we're going to be workshopping what are different ADLs, what are things that help get you through your day. We have pets, like you need to feed and care for your animals and do that sort of thing. And you need to maybe for somebody, they struggle to get out of the house at all. Maybe somebody else is able to go for a short walk in their neighborhood, even if you just make it one street down and turn around, just something that helps to get you doing the things that help your body to feel better.
And that shouldn't be a list that you make up that day.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's such a good point.
That's a list you make up in conversation with the therapist that you adhere to on your own on the other days of the week when you're not in a therapy session, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's hard to come up with those things in the middle of a depression. And so like for you, that list was something that you were able to put together on a good day, the things that you knew did help to make you feel better. I think in fact you had just come out of a depressive episode.
Yeah.
And so on the other side of
So
that.
the question was like, what are we going to do next time?
Yes. Yeah.
Well, I need to shower.
And it can help make a situation, an experience like that easier to know you do have a plan, because it's so difficult to imagine what you could possibly do to feel better, and to know I have this list that works. And the next time you did experience depression, I think it sat a little lighter with you, because you were able to have this list and to go, when I don't feel like I can move, I actually know what to do. And I actually know that these things have helped me before.
And what's crazy about that? What's the wildest part about combating this depression, this depressed state with these ADLs, and this like changing your thinking about the way you navigate this time?
What is the most wild
The
thing
neural
about that?
pathways
Oh,
that you
yeah.
create,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, that doing those things. So anytime we have a behavior that we're repeating again and again, or a thought that we're practicing again and again, it literally changes the structure of our brain. And so you can get into now this well-worn path that you know how to walk, and that you go to again and again, and it can become almost automatic for you to do those things. And that's something that we saw be true for you. When you learned to do those things and implement them and they started feeling better, it was easier to get up and do that list.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, when I'm struggling with depression now, it looks a lot different than when I struggled with depression 4 years ago. Yeah. In fact, it doesn't really look like depression at all anymore.
No, at the time it would be hard to imagine that this is the experience you would have, because it used to take over your whole life when you were depressed.
And now I'm at a point where I can go to the gym, and I can go to work, and I can do the things that I want to accomplish in my life. Yeah. And I'm just aware that I need more sleep, and that I need to treat myself like I have a little bit of a cold. Yeah. And be a little kinder to myself. But it doesn't really impact the day-to-day of my life anymore. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it takes conscious effort to get there.
It does. Yeah, it takes conscious effort, a conscious plan, and really not being in that alone. Depression lies to us so much, again, about how life has always been, how it'll be, who we are, what our value is. And to be able to have that outside perspective is huge. And then to be able to create this list of things that you know are tried and true and help get you back to where you need to be. Depression's marked by hopelessness, a sense that things won't get better. And when you have this list of things that you know actually do work, you don't have to experience that whole feeling, the whole impact of hopelessness. You're like, things don't feel good. Yeah. But I know that things get better because I've been here.
So listener, I want you to pay attention to what we're saying here. That if things feel hopeless right now, they feel hopeless. We accept that. I understand that. I understand how hopeless a depressed state leaves you feeling. Yeah. But if you start taking specific steps to participate in activities on a daily basis that make you feel better, you will start to feel better. That's a promise. It won't happen overnight, but you will start to come out of that depressed state, feeling more in control over your own life and the enjoyment of your life. Yeah. Depression doesn't just go away magically, especially unless you're bipolar, I guess. But these things, you can't will them away. Right. They go away because you choose to take actions that reinforce joy and security and happiness into your life. And it doesn't feel that way at first. But if you keep going down that path, you will find some sense of peace. Yeah. At least.
Something that I talk with depressed clients about is just, can we nurture a sense of curiosity about the future? Because hopefulness about the future seems so far away. And like looking forward to something that you really believe you could delight in just doesn't feel like a possibility. But is there anything that we can wonder about? Is there anything that we could just feel curious enough about to want to take the steps to get there? And that often that's a much easier feeling to muster, and it can be a life-saving sort of feeling to just have curiosity about what could come or what could be.
Wow. So let's talk about on the other end of this, the bipolar spectrum, mania or hypomania.
Yeah.
I have a few thoughts of things that have really helped me navigate those periods. What do you tell your clients, though?
Yeah. Well, once again, okay. So there's some commitment to a plan that happens during that. You're going to keep coming to sessions because, again, what can be really common is not continuing with medication and not continuing to come to counseling.
Yeah, what are you talking about? I feel great. I don't need counseling. I don't need anybody telling me what to do. I don't need medication holding me back. I am at the top of my game. This is incredible.
Yes. And so while it's always your decision to come to counseling, usually clients will want some sort of accountability. If I don't show for a session, will you reach out to me? And so we'll make some sort of plan around, okay, we're going to agree to do this. And even if you just show up and you feel great and we spend 15 minutes talking about how great you feel and then you're out the door, that's allowed, that's fine. Usually they come in and there's more to talk about because there's other things going on.
Right.
But we'll make a plan that feels simple enough to stick to. Can you agree to just have a check-in, even if you're feeling at the top of the world? And so that's one of the things that'll happen. It's usually just about getting somebody in the door. Other things that we do are really, there can be a lack of ability to see into the future for how the things that you're doing right now are going to impact you. Either I can do the things I'm doing right now forever and ever, and this will be sustainable for me.
Yeah.
And maybe it's not going to be sustainable, or the things that I'm doing now aren't going to have a negative impact on the future.
Well, I have a world-class example or analogy.
Okay.
Buckle in. Strap in. It's like you are cooking dinner on an open fire.
Yep.
Like you're camping or something. And you think, okay, more heat equals faster cook time. So you get some gasoline to throw it on the fire. And it goes up immediately. It's spectacular. It's huge.
Yeah, it's
flame.
bright. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and it's very visually impressive. But you've charred your dinner. You've completely cooked it because what you needed was a consistent flame or a consistent heat source.
Yeah.
And that's what mania is. It is, I am going to accomplish what I want to right here, right now. I am going to do this massive project without stopping.
Yep, I'm unstoppable.
I'm unstoppable. We are going to throw gasoline on this fire, and gasoline on the fire is only suitable for a visual spectacle. Right?
Yeah, it burns bright, but it burns out quick, and it leaves a lot of destruction in its wake.
Yeah, it's inherently destructive. Yeah. So that's what I have to remind myself when I'm feeling that way, when I'm feeling manic, that this is inherently destructive, that this drive that I have is not productive.
Yes. I think the conversation we're having most often when you're dealing with hypomania is about pacing yourself. is about pacing out what you're doing and doing it in a sustainable way. And so that's a lot of what we do. You know, something else that's really helpful about counseling with bipolar disorder is that I can usually start to recognize the signs of which way things are swinging before the client can.
Oh, wow.
And so just because I'm an outside witness and trained in it, but I'm getting to start to notice those signs that something is different, something is changing. And we can start, they start to notice what it feels like in its early moments, not things have spun out of control and now I realize I was having a manic episode, but I'm starting to think differently. I think I have an upcoming manic episode.
Yeah, I know that. Yep.
So getting to recognize those things ahead of time is so helpful, and then getting to plan around them. Okay, so what normally happens when we're dealing with a manic episode? Let's put some protections in place. Let's make sure people who you know in your life that you love and trust are checking in with you, are helping to balance you, that you're checking in with, your plans and what you're doing with somebody who loves and cares about you taking good care of yourself.
Yeah, for me, I check in with you. I will say, these are the things I'm looking to get done today. And I'm taking a break at this point.
Yeah.
Like, when I am done with these things, I am done. I am going to go relax.
Scheduled downtime.
You have to schedule your own downtime, because when you look at a list that, if you look at everything I want to accomplish through a hypomanic episode as if it were a list, it is unreasonable. But the problem is, I never make a list. I just do it.
Yeah.
And it's just one thing after the other, all the way down to a complete crash and burnout. But when I am able to actually plan ahead and instill these like safety gaps in my schedule, and I am forced to I force myself to adhere to that, it's actually the exact same but mirrored opposite thing that I'm doing when I'm feeling depressed. I'm making a plan for myself outside of the moment.
Well, yeah, that it's not the feelings that you're having, which are valid, and the experience that you're having, which is valid, but it's something that exists outside of that, something that is true and good and healthy for you, that exists outside of that really intense feeling, that's helping to be a map for how to move through that moment in time.
I think that my bipolar disorder is not as fun to talk about as my like ADHD diagnosis or your autism diagnosis. It's not as exciting because it is so serious.
Yeah, it has been some of the hardest times in our life, I think, have revolved around those moments.
Yeah.
And usually they don't happen in a vacuum. It has tended to be around big moments in our life that those things have occurred, but they have been some really difficult times, and we can't have this conversation and ignore that those things are true.
Yeah, and I would say I've almost lost my life to this.
Yeah.
And that's hard to admit. But if I want anybody to know anything about this from somebody who has it, and from someone who's married to a therapist who helps people deal with this, is that it is something that can be dealt with.
Yeah.
Through a combination of medication that gives you the opportunity to level out your emotions so that you have a fighting chance.
Yeah.
And then you are cognizantly working on making plans to mitigate the lowest of the lows and the highest of the highs.
Yep.
This becomes manageable.
And not only manageable, but we have started to live our life in some ways, as much as it's different than it used to be, as much as now it is not this huge ebb and flow, but that we live our life in these seasons where when you are experiencing this like increased amount of energy, we get things done. You'll feel it coming up, and we'll make plans for things that are going to happen around the house that we're going to do in a paced and measured way. But you do have all of this energy, and you do need less sleep, and you are able to get more done, and you want to. And so we get to plan out things that are actually, that you feel good about kind of putting your hand to and about making happen. And then sometimes you have these periods of low energy or full on depression, and we all kind of buckle in, and we have movie nights, and we cuddle and remind each other how much we love each other, and we really like pare our life down to fit those things, and that that it doesn't run our life, but we get to have really meaningful things occur in all of those seasons.
Well, I think what we keep coming back to in this podcast is that your brain works the way that your brain works, and it's on you to learn how to work with it.
Yeah.
And it is okay to accept who you are and to learn tools to navigate those things.
Yeah, and that with the people who love us, there is this exchange where sometimes you have all of this outpouring of energy, and you scrape our whole entire ceiling in a day, or chop 2 years of firewood in a couple weeks, or you do something that is like completely provided for us for a long period of time, and then you need to slow down and depend on somebody, and that's an okay thing in life, and that we all have something like that, where there are aspects of us that are so good and are so when we're able to manage them well, can really contribute to good things, and that it's okay to have those systems in place, to rely on other people, to have check-ins, to have people who know you, sometimes better than you know yourself, and who can call those things out to you.
Yeah, I've definitely, before this was diagnosed, I've lost friends.
Yeah.
I have seriously damaged relationships in my life. But now that I know what is going on and I'm able to articulate what I need and what I'm going through, it has enabled the people who care about me to care about me even better.
And to name those things has been so helpful, that you can let your friends know, listen, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
And they're able to show you that sort of support and love, and that those friends have been so dear to us, and they really know and love us well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm wondering, do you have any other thoughts to share about being a therapist who is so close to the topic of bipolar disorder?
Yeah. I, of course, want people who have bipolar disorder to know that, like, you are so lovable and you are so worthy of having good things in your life. That just because this is something that has maybe been very costly to you, it doesn't make you a bad partner. It doesn't make you a bad person. And that it's certainly something that can be manageable. And even, I think that your bipolar disorder has given you this really deep sense of empathy for people who struggle, and like you recognizing what was happening with that person in the gym. You have really been able to speak into people's life in a different way, and that's almost always what recognition of these things gets to do for us, and the vulnerability that you can choose to have around it is such a gift to others, that everybody's struggling in some way. So I want you to know that you're valuable and very lovable, and that you're not alone. This is something that's manageable, and that there really are real tools that work to help with this process, that it's not something you have to go through alone, and it's not something you should go through alone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, I think that we will wrap up there.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for your time.
And we will see you next time on I Married Your Therapist.